What would you do if a retired police dog scratched at a trash can only for you to uncover a murder everyone else had forgotten? You can tell everything about a person by how their dog behaves around them. That's what Officer Sarah Blake always believed. And tonight, standing under the flickering streetlights behind the old Maple Lane Library, watching her retired canine partner growl low and steady at a grimy trash can, that belief burned brighter than ever. Trooper wasn't just any dog. He was 11 years old, mostly deaf in his left ear, and his eyes had gone cloudy with time. Arthritis slowed his back legs, but his instincts? Razor sharp, the kind that don't retire. And tonight those instincts were screaming. "Trooper," Sarah said softly, tugging his leash. "Come on, it's just trash, let's go." But he didn't budge. Instead, he dug in massive paws, clawing at the metal can so hard it screeched. His nose pressed under the lid, as if he were chasing the scent of a ghost. Sarah's spine prickled. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't a raccoon or the smell of food. This was something else, something darker. The park was quiet. Suburban quiet, the kind that usually wraps around you like a blanket. But not tonight. Kids had gone home. Porch lights blinked on in the houses lining Maple Lane. The air smelled of wet leaves and cooling asphalt. Sarah wasn't even on duty. She'd clocked out 2 hours earlier. This walk was supposed to be casual coffee from the corner shop, maybe a stroll through the trail. Now she stood 10 feet from a trash bin with her old partner growling like he'd just walked onto a live crime scene. Her breath caught in her throat. "All right," she muttered, unclipping the leash from her belt. "Let's see what's got you spooked, old boy." The stench hit first spoiled food, soda, damp paper, then something else. Half buried under greasy wrappers and broken styrofoam was a folded hoodie, grey. Torn at the elbow, stuffed like someone had thrown it away in a hurry. Sarah's eyes narrowed. She reached for it, then froze. The sleeve. A smear. Brownish red. Not paint. Blood. Dried blood. A chill ran through her arms. She stepped back and pulled a pen from her jacket, gently lifting the fabric without touching it directly. Training kicked in years of instinct and evidence handling procedures. Even off duty, she carried an evidence bag in her patrol SUV. Old habits. Thank God for them. She sealed the hoodie, snapped a few photos on her phone, and finally glanced down at Trooper. He'd stopped growling. He just sat there, calm, alert, like he'd done his job again. Sarah's hands were still shaking when she locked the evidence in her car, but she didn't radio it in. Not yet. She knew how this would sound back at the station. A bloody hoodie in a public trash can. Could have been from a fistfight, a nosebleed, a squirrel bite. Kids play rough. But something in her gut whispered louder. No, this mattered. On the drive home, the bag sat on the passenger seat. She couldn't stop glancing at it. It felt like it was whispering something she couldn't quite hear yet. A story half buried. Unfinished. And then, like a lightning bolt, it hit her. April Carter, 17 years old, honor student, disappeared 9 months ago. Last seen walking home from her part-time job. Right near this very stretch of park. Sarah had worked the case. For weeks, she and Trooper had combed the woods, knocked on doors, followed every dead-end lead. There had been no blood, no body. No answers. Only silence. Only absence. Could it be connected? She parked in her driveway, turned off the engine, and sat in stillness. Trooper rested his chin on the back seat. Calm now. Steady. "You still got it," Sarah whispered, smiling at him, soft, uneasy. "You always do." The next morning, she drove the hoodie to the Oak Ridge Crime Lab herself, 30 minutes away, but faster results. She filed it as recovered evidence, nothing more. No theories, no wild connections. But her mind wouldn't let it go. Why that bin? Why now? Why toss a bloody hoodie where children play 4 times a week? Back at the precinct, Sarah said nothing, took her shift, logged calls, broke up a neighbor dispute, helped a woman with a stolen bicycle. But when dusk settled again, she reached for Trooper's leash, and a flashlight, and a new evidence kit, and a quiet prayer that she was wrong. But deep down, she knew she wasn't. Sarah Blake didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the way Trooper had clawed at the trash can like his life depended on it. Her mind kept circling back to the hoodie. The blood. The unmistakable feeling that something had been calling to her from that binnet with sound, but with silence. And a name kept echoing in her chest like a drumbeat. Emily Carter, 17, high school junior. Starred in the spring play, Honor Roll, went missing 9 months ago without a trace, no signs of a struggle. No blood, just gone. Sarah had worked the case during those first frantic weeks. Trooper too. They'd searched the wooded trails and the maintenance lots, scoured camera footage from gas stations and traffic lights. She'd interviewed teachers, classmates, her parents. None of it led anywhere. Eventually the calls stopped. The posters faded. The urgency dissolved into that cruel, quiet phrase no cop ever wants to say, cold case. But not for Sarah. And clearly, not for Trooper either. The next morning, Sarah called out sick officially. Unofficially, she was deep in her own investigation. She sat in her home office with a steaming mug of coffee that had gone cold twice already. Emily's file was open on the desk, spread out like puzzle pieces she'd never been able to connect. Photos, witness statements, maps, the timeline, and then there it was. She found herself staring at the grainy security cam image taken the week Emily disappeared. Emily, walking alone near the park, wearing jeans, sneakers, and a grey hoodie. Her breath caught. Sarah pulled up the photos she'd taken of the hoodie from the trash. It was faded now, but the style matched. So did the tear in the left elbow. And in the right lighting, yes, there had once been a red logo on the front. Her hands started to shake. Could it be the same hoodie? If it was, then that meant someone had held on to it for months, and only now decided to dump it in a public bin. Why? Why now? Her gut whispered a possibility she didn't want to entertain. Someone came back. She stared at the bag from the lab, labeled, sealed, tagged with her badge number. A piece of cloth, no longer just evidence, it had become a message, a voice that hadn't been heard in 9 months. And Trooper? He'd heard it first. Later that day, she returned to the station, back in uniform, smile in place. No mention of the hoodie. She took her calls like normal, wrote her reports, nodded through the morning briefing. But when her shift ended and the sun dipped below the rooftops, she didn't go home. She leashed up Trooper, and she went back to the park. Not for a stroll this time. This time, she carried a fresh evidence kit, gloves, a flashlight, and that quiet determination that had carried her through the worst cases of her career. They started near the trash can, but Trooper didn't stop there. He pulled slightly on the leash, ears alert, tail low, not playful. Focused. Sarah let him lead. He guided her down a narrow path that ran behind the library and wrapped around the back lot, where a chain-link fence separated the park from the old town maintenance yard. Rusted trucks and broken lawnmowers sat in the shadows, forgotten by time. Then Trooper stopped. He sniffed once, twice, and froze. Sarah swept the area with her flashlight. Dirt, leaves, old tire marks. Nothing obvious. Then Trooper lunged. To the right, into the brush. Sarah followed fast, crouching as she pushed through a wall of bramble. There, between 2 moss-covered stones near a drainage ditch, was something blackened and curled. A glove, singed at the fingertips, stuffed in between the rocks like someone had tried to hide it. Sarah didn't touch it. She reached into her bag, pulled out a fresh evidence pouch and sealed it. Her heart pounded. Another breadcrumb. Another thing someone thought they could bury. Back at home that night, Sarah pulled out the case file again. She flipped to Emily's last known location, 3 blocks from the trash can. Her last known outfit? Grey hoodie, red logo, tear at the elbow, the exact one she'd found. Sarah stared at the old photo of Emily smiling, arms crossed, standing in her front yard next to her mom's azaleas. She closed the file slowly, her pulse steady but low in her throat. This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't some teen scuffle or squirrel attack. This was a trail, a silent scream. And Trooper? He was listening. As Sarah sat in the living room, Trooper lay curled on the floor nearby. His ears twitched when she moved. His head lifted when she whispered. "You knew, didn't you?" she said softly, brushing her hand across his greying fur. "You knew she was still out there." Trooper leaned his head into her palm. Sarah exhaled. Tomorrow she'd follow the scent further. But tonight she sat in the silence, surrounded by unanswered questions, and the quiet, unwavering presence of the one partner who never gave up. The next morning, the sky hung low and grey, clouds curling like smoke above the rooftops of Maple Lane. Rain had passed through in the early hours, leaving the ground slick with dew and the air thick with the smell of pine and wet earth. Officer Sarah Blake poured herself a cup of coffee she'd never finish. Trooper sat by the door, tail flicking once, then again. His eyes, clouded but alert, watched her the way he always did, like he knew something was waiting. And maybe he did. Sarah clipped the leash to his collar and grabbed her gear, flashlight, gloves, fresh evidence bags. She had no plan, no warrant, no backup, just a nagging instinct and a dog that couldn't let things go. They returned to the park, but Trooper didn't even glance at the trash can this time. Instead, he headed toward the chain-link fence, again same path as the night before. But then he paused, sniffed the wind, and veered left. Behind the maintenance lot, the trail faded into overgrowth. Most people didn't bother with it. Thorny bushes, low-hanging limbs. No one walked their kids or dogs this far. It was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Trooper moved with purpose. Sarah followed, ducking under branches, stepping over twisted roots. Her boots sank into the mud. Leaves clung to her sleeves. Still, she pressed on, her breath tight, her fingers twitching near the flashlight on her belt. They walked for 15 minutes before Trooper stopped cold. He stood rigid, ears perked, nose twitching, and then he scratched. Once. Twice. Harder now. Sarah knelt beside him, heart thudding. There, at the base of a mossy log, half buried beneath damp leaves, was a small metal box. Rusted. Dented. The kind a kid might use for keepsakes or someone else might use to hide something they didn't want found. Her fingers trembled as she cleared the debris. She peeled the lid open with care. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, were 3 things. A silver bracelet, delicate and worn, engraved with tiny initials. EC. A photograph, torn clean down the middle. One half showed Emily Carter, smiling in her school uniform. The other half was missing. And a note, handwritten in shaky, uneven scrawl. She shouldn't have fought back. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Instead, she reached into her bag, slid on gloves, and placed each item into individual evidence bags, labeling them with location, time, her badge number. Her fingers moved on autopilot, but her mind was spinning. The bracelet. She remembered it. Emily's mother. Angela Carter had described it during their first interview. Her father gave it to her when she turned 16, she'd said through tears. A little silver chain with her initials. She wore it every day. Never took it off. And now, here it was, hidden in the woods. Alongside a message that made Sarah's skin crawl. This wasn't just random. This was deliberate. This was guilt. Trooper sat down beside her, chest rising and falling, as if he'd exhaled something heavy he'd been holding for months. "You still got it," she whispered. "You really do." Back at the precinct, Sarah filed the evidence personally, logging the GPS coordinates, sealing the chain of custody, backing up every photo 3 times. She didn't want this trail to go cold again. Not now. Not ever. Then, after some hesitation, she made a call. Angela Carter answered on the second ring. "Hello?" Her voice was soft, cautious, like she wasn't sure whether to hope or brace for heartbreak. "Mrs. Carter," Sarah said gently. "It's Officer Blake. I found something today." "Near the park." A long pause. Then, "Is it about Emily?" "Yes, ma'am. We found a silver bracelet and a photo." The sound that came through the phone wasn't quite a sob, more like a gasp choked by disbelief. "I gave her that bracelet," Angela said, voice shaking. "She never took it off. Not once." Sarah closed her eyes. "I'm so sorry." "I can't say more just yet, but I wanted you to hear it from me." "Thank you," Angela whispered. "Thank you for not giving up." After the call, Sarah didn't go home. She drove the long way around town, letting the engine hum as the wipers pushed drizzle off the windshield. Trooper lay curled in the back seat, his ears still flicking, his nose occasionally pressed to the window like he was still working the case in his mind. And maybe he was. Sarah passed the corner where Emily had last been seen. The sidewalk, the lamppost, the red brick ice cream shop where she'd worked weekends, everything looked so normal. It made her chest ache. 9 months, no answers. Until a dog with arthritis and a stubborn nose pointed her straight to the truth. Sarah exhaled slowly. Tomorrow, she'd dig deeper. She'd reopen every witness statement, re-examine every lead, re-interview every person who'd crossed Emily's path. But tonight, she pulled into her driveway. She sat in the car long after the engine shut off, hand resting on the gear shift, the rain ticking gently against the roof. Trooper's head nudged her elbow. Sarah smiled through the fog in her chest. "Yeah," she murmured. "I know." "You're not done yet." The rain had stopped by morning, but the clouds lingered low and heavy like a warning. Officer Sarah Blake stood in the small briefing room at the precinct, staring down at the printout in her hand. A close-up image of the hoodie she'd pulled from the trash can behind the library, torn at the elbow, stained with dried blood. But that wasn't what made her chest tighten. It was the logo. Faint, but visible in the right light. A red eagle across the front pocket. A design she hadn't noticed at first. But now, it nagged at her. Emily Carter's photo, the one her mother had framed in their living room, showed the girl smiling in her backyard, arms crossed, wearing a plain grey hoodie, no logo, no eagle. Just simple, soft fleece. Which begged the question, was the hoodie even hers? Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She stepped back into her office, spread the evidence photos out across the desk, and compared everything again. Same size, similar fabric. Same tear at the elbow. But the logo, it didn't match. Her stomach turned. Had she been wrong? Had she let Trooper's instincts override her own? But Nosh trusted that dog with her life. He'd never failed her. Not once. If the hoodie didn't belong to Emily, then who did it belong to? And more importantly, why was it covered in her blood? She pulled the original case file from the cabinet and began combing through the interviews again. One statement in particular stood out this time, one she'd glossed over months ago. It came from Becca, a barista who worked near the high school. She told officers that she overheard Emily mention someone had been watching her during her walks home. No name, no details, just a guy in a grey hoodie, always across the street. Sarah sat back, the realization crawling over her skin like ice. What if the hoodie hadn't belonged to Emily? What if it belonged to him? She ran a search through local stores and outlets that sold that specific design. It didn't take long. A match popped up at a place called Coleman's Military Surplus, just outside of town.
Old boots, backpacks, hoodies.
The kind of place teens with tight budgets or loners with nowhere to be might frequent. Sarah grabbed her jacket and keys. Trooper, already standing near the door, didn't need to be told twice. 20 minutes later, they pulled up in front of Coleman's. The storefront looked like it hadn't changed since the 90s faded camouflage jackets in the windows, a sun-bleached open sign barely clinging to the glass. Inside, it smelled like dust and old leather. A bell jingled overhead. Behind the counter stood a lean man in an army veteran cap, chewing sunflower seeds and thumbing through a stack of receipts. His name tag read, Mr. Whitaker. "Help you, officer?" he asked, voice gravelly. Sarah held up the photo. "Ever seen this hoodie?" He squinted.
Yeah, that's one of ours. We sold those a while back.
3 for $20. Haven't had them in stock for a few months. Any way to trace purchases? He laughed once. Not unless they paid with gold bars. Folks pay cash, no IDs for hoodies. Sarah nodded. Ever have someone stand out?
Wearing that brand? Acting off? Mr. Whitaker tilted his head.
Actually, yeah, skinny kid, early 20s. Came in a lot asking weird questions about bushcraft and hunting knives. Said he worked in laundry but smelled like gasoline and metal. Creeped my niece out when she worked the counter. You get a name? No, ma'am. But I told him not to come back. He drove a rusty red pickup, tail light duct-taped. Sarah's breath caught. A red pickup. Her heart thumped as she thanked Mr. Whitaker and returned to the precinct. She pulled up all vehicle reports from the area around Emily's disappearance. Red pickups with citations for damage. Only one stood out. Logan Pierce. Her jaw tightened. She remembered interviewing him during the original investigation. He'd claimed to be working the night Emily vanished at the coal industrial laundry plant. His alibi had been backed by a co-worker. Nothing had tied him directly to the case. Until now. She reopened Logan's file. He'd lived just 4 blocks from where Emily was last seen. Quiet guy. No priors, not much of a digital trail, but the red truck, the hoodie, the blood, the instincts of a dog who wouldn't let go. Sarah didn't wait. That evening she drove back to Logan's neighborhood, parked a block away, watched his house from a distance. Trooper sat beside her in the passenger seat, ears alert, eyes scanning. The truck was still there, same duct-taped taillight. She approached the front door and knocked. It took a while, but finally the door opened. Logan Pierce stood there, thinner than his file photo, cheeks hollow, hands stained with grease. "Officer," he said with a twitchy smile. "Everything okay?" Sarah gave a calm nod. "Just a few follow-up questions. Cold case. Emily Carter." The smile faltered. "Again?" "Afraid so." He leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "I already gave my statement." "I know." "But sometimes people remember things. Sometimes evidence resurfaces." His jaw clenched slightly. That's when Trooper stepped forward. He didn't growl, didn't bark, just stiffened, his body tense, his nose twitching. Sarah felt the shift in the air. "You mind if I take a look around your shed?" she asked, voice casual. Logan hesitated. "It's just tools." "Junk, nothing to see." Sarah smiled softly. "All the same." That night, she didn't push further. Not yet. But she had a feeling. And she had Trooper. And tomorrow, she'd have more. Because now she wasn't just chasing memories. She was chasing the truth. The sun had barely set when Officer Sarah Blake parked her unmarked cruiser 1 block from Logan Pierce's house. She left the engine running and turned off the lights. Trooper sat beside her in the passenger seat, ears forward, posture still. The air inside the car was quiet, heavy with anticipation. Logan's front porch was dark. No motion. No music. Just a flicker of TV light dancing across the curtains. Sarah watched for movement. Any movement. Her instincts were tingling again, sharp and uneasy. But more than that, she trusted his instincts. Trooper hadn't growled at Logan, hadn't barked. But the moment they'd approached that house earlier, he'd gone rigid. Silent. Watching. Like something wasn't right, and he couldn't put his nose on it yet. Sarah checked the clock on the dash. 9:42 p.m. She adjusted her seat, took a sip of her lukewarm coffee, and waited. At exactly 10:07, the porch light blinked on. The door creaked open. Logan Pierce stepped out. He wore a zipped-up, hoodie dark green this time, and a ball cap pulled low over his eyes. He carried a black duffel bag in one hand. With the other, he locked the door and glanced over his shoulder. Sarah sat up straighter. Logan moved fast, heading toward his truck. He tossed the duffel in the bed, climbed in, and pulled away from the curb without turning on his headlights for the first few seconds. That was enough. Sarah turned the key and eased out behind him, trailing just far enough not to draw attention. "Dispatch," she said quietly over the radio. "This is Officer Blake. I'm off duty in civilian vehicle. Following possible subject connected to cold case, just in case something goes sideways." Logan didn't stop for gas, didn't swing by a store. He drove straight out of town, turning onto a narrow gravel road leading toward the abandoned Stone Hollow quarry, a place no one had any business being after dark. Sarah pulled over and cut the engine. The gravel cracked under her boots as she stepped out, flashlight in one hand, other resting near her sidearm. Trooper waited for her signal. They moved together quiet, low, smooth. Logan's truck sat just ahead, near a rusted utility shed, half hidden by overgrowth. Its taillights glowed red as the engine idled. Then they went dark. He'd killed the ignition. Sarah crouched behind a bush, peering through the branches. Logan opened the truck bed and pulled out the duffel. Something metal clanked inside. She raised her phone and snapped a few silent photos. Then she whispered, "Stay," to Trooper. The dog tensed, obedient but wired, muscles coiled. Sarah stepped forward, keeping her flashlight down and her voice steady. "Logan Pierce, this is Officer Sarah Blake." "Step away from the shed." He spun, startled. For a second, it looked like he might bolt, but he didn't. Instead, he raised both hands slowly. "What the hell are you doing out here?" she demanded, keeping a careful distance. "I was just dumping some old junk," he stammered. "Tools?" "Stuff I don't need." "At 10 o'clock at night? In a place that's been condemned for years?" "I didn't want to wake the neighbors." Sarah didn't flinch. "Open the bag." Slowly. He hesitated, then unzipped it. Inside were a pair of gloves, a bottle of bleach, a small crowbar, several heavy-duty trash bags. Sarah's gut twisted. She motioned to the shed. "What's under the tarp?" Logan's voice cracked. "I nothing, just old stuff." "Step back." She moved past him, keeping him in her peripheral vision, reached the shed, yanked the tarp. Underneath, a muddy shovel, a half-buried plastic bucket, and a pair of boots with treads that matched the scene of Emily Carter's disappearance. Her breath hitched. Then he ran, bolted into the darkness, crashing through brush. Sarah shouted, "Stop! Police!" And behind her, Trooper launched. No hesitation, no command needed. He surged forward like a missile, slicing through the trees, his dark silhouette a blur of muscle and memory. Sarah gave chase, dodging limbs, leaping over rocks. Her flashlight beam bounced wildly. Then, through the branches, she saw it. Trooper had him cornered. He didn't bite. Just barked low, feral, commanding, herding Logan back like he'd done it 100 times before. Logan tripped and fell. Sarah caught up, cuffs already in her hand. "You're done running," she said, breath short. "Get up." Back at the station, Logan sat in interview room B, silent as stone. He'd asked for a lawyer the moment he arrived. Didn't say a word. Sarah didn't care. She had what she needed. Photos, the bleach kit, the gloves, the boots, the suspicious behavior, and above all, Trooper's instincts, leading her again, unwavering. But one thing still gnawed at her. What if Logan didn't kill Emily? What if he was covering for someone? Sarah stood outside the interrogation room, arms crossed. Trooper lay beside her, his head on his paws, ears still alert. Captain Raymond Ellis approached, a manila folder in hand. "We got the results," he said. Sarah looked up.
From the lab? He nodded. The blood on the hoodie. DNA match. Emily? Confirmed.
"It's hers." Sarah didn't move. Everything inside her went still. It wasn't just a hunch anymore. It wasn't just Trooper's growl or a buried bracelet or a photograph torn in half. It was proof. Emily had bled in that hoodie, and someone had tried to hide it. Sarah exhaled slowly, hand resting on Trooper's back. "You knew," she whispered. He flicked his ear. She smiled. "We're not done." The precinct was quiet that morning. Not the usual hum of phones or chatter by the coffee pot, just the heavy stillness of truth settling in. Officer Sarah Blake stood at the evidence board in her office, arms crossed, staring at a line of pinned photos. Emily Carter's smiling face, the bloody hoodie, the silver bracelet, the burned glove, and now, Logan Pierce in custody. But something wasn't sitting right. She glanced down at Trooper, lying at her feet. His eyes were half closed, his breathing slow, but every so often his ears would twitch, still listening, still alert. Even after everything, he hadn't let the case go. Neither had she. Her phone buzzed. Incoming. Forensics lab. Oak Ridge. She snatched it up, hands tense. The message was short. Fingerprint on glove does not match Logan Pierce. Identified? Derek Vance. Previous charges: petty theft, assault, aggravated stalking. Served time. Last known address: Cleveland, Ohio. Sarah blinked. Derek Vance. She'd never heard the name during the original investigation. But now, here he was, his fingerprints on the burned glove Trooper had uncovered in the bushes. A violent past. A stalking conviction. And according to the system, he'd moved to their area 1 week before Emily disappeared. Her stomach dropped. She pulled up employment records. And there it was. Cole Industrial Laundry. Same shift as Logan. Same week Emily vanished. Her breath hitched. All this time, she'd thought Logan was the monster. But what if he wasn't? What if he was the one being used? Sarah grabbed the manila file from her desk and moved down the hall to interview room B. Logan sat with his arms crossed, jaw tight. His lawyer, Kendall Hume, lounged beside him, rumpled suit, smug expression. "I already told you," Hume said, before Sarah could even sit. "My client's not saying a word." Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't need words. She pulled out a photo, the mugshot of Derek Vance, and dropped it on the table. "Do you recognize him?" she asked. Logan's eyes flicked toward it. Just a glance, but it was enough. Sarah leaned in. "He worked with you, same shift." "Same week. You lied about being alone." Logan didn't respond. "Why?" she pressed. "What were you afraid of?" Still nothing. She took a slow breath and laid out the evidence, photos one by one. The hoodie, the bracelet, the shovel, the bleach, the gloves with Derek's fingerprints. Then she held up the torn photograph, the one found in the hidden box Trooper had led her to. Half of Emily's face, and someone standing beside her, arm around her shoulders. "We found the other half," Sarah said quietly. Logan's fingers trembled. He swallowed hard. Sarah studied him. "You didn't kill her, did you?" He looked away. "You saw something," she said. "Maybe you helped hide it. Maybe you were scared. Maybe you thought if you kept quiet, it would all go away. Still,
He said nothing, but the guilt was written across his face clear as ink. You kept that photo, she added, voice softer. Not because you were proud, but because you couldn't let her disappear completely. His mouth opened, then closed again. Out in the hallway, Sarah leaned against the wall, exhaling hard.
Trooper nudged her hand gently, sensing her unrest, like he always did. Moments later, Captain Raymond Ellis approached with a folder in hand. We got a hit, he said, eyes serious. Sarah straightened. On what? The glove, the one Trooper found. It's Vance's print. Confirmed match. She stared at him. So Logan didn't lie about everything. Maybe not, the captain said. But he still withheld evidence, still obstructed an investigation. He's involved, just not the way we thought. Sarah opened the file again. Derek Vance. He had a juvenile record. A sealed stalking charge, a brief prison term for aggravated assault. Then, nothing. No employment after the laundry plant. No phone number. No known relatives. He just disappeared. Except, maybe not. She searched the system again, this time scanning for anyone who'd listed Vance as a relative or emergency contact. Only one name popped up. Rita Vance, cousin. Lives on the outskirts of town. Never interviewed. Her heart pounded. Sometimes, the ones who hide best don't go far. Sarah grabbed her coat and keys. Trooper rose without a sound. They were moving again. The road to Rita's house was more a trail than a street, overgrown, uneven, nearly invisible from the main road. A crooked mailbox leaned under a dying oak tree. The house itself was small, yellow paint peeling from the siding. A rusted truck parked beneath a tarp out front. No lights, no movement. Sarah parked 2 houses away and approached on foot. Trooper stayed close, every step measured. His body tense. As they neared the backyard fence, a soft sound cracked the airwood creaking. A quick, hushed footstep. Sarah froze. Then she saw him. Behind the shed, Derek Vance. He was thinner than his mugshot, hair longer, hoodie up. But it was him. He turned and ran. Stop! Police! Sarah shouted, bolting forward. Trooper didn't wait. He launched into the brush, fast and focused. Within seconds, he was circling Derek, barking fiercely, cutting him off. Derek swung a stick, but Trooper dodged. Sarah arrived seconds later, sidearm raised. Hands where I can see them! Derek froze, panting, wild-eyed. You don't get it, he rasped. You weren't there. I don't care, Sarah said, her voice cold. I care about Emily Carter, and you're going to tell me what happened. He dropped to his knees, hands up. And for the first time, he confessed. The room was cold. Not from the air conditioning, but from the silence, the kind that fills an interrogation room when a secret has finally run out of places to hide. Derek Vance sat across from Officer Sarah Blake, his wrists cuffed to the table, his hoodie damp with sweat, his eyes bloodshot but focused. He hadn't asked for a lawyer. Not yet. Trooper lay just outside the door, waiting, as always. Calm. Still. Watching the hallway. Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten or coax, she simply said, "Tell me." And Derek did. The words came slowly at first, like they hadn't been spoken in a long time, or maybe never at all. I didn't mean to kill her, he began. His voice was low, rough. I followed her. For weeks. After school, from work, she looked happy. Safe. I didn't have that. Sarah didn't speak. She didn't even know me, he went on. I watched from across the street. I thought maybe if I just said hi, she'd smile back. He stared at the table. That night, I waited behind the gas station. I thought if I talked to her, maybe something would change. Maybe I'd feel human again. He laughed bitterly, a hollow, broken sound. But she saw me, knew something was wrong. She fought, screamed, tried to run. He paused. I panicked. Sarah's throat tightened. I put my hand over her mouth, told her to be quiet, but she wouldn't stop. She scratched me, bit me. He held up one scarred hand. I pushed her. She fell. Hit the ground. Then I don't remember everything, but she stopped moving. His eyes welled, but no tears fell. I didn't know what to do. So I dragged her into the woods, hid her things, burned what I could. He exhaled slowly, like the weight of the truth was collapsing inside him. And Logan, he found out. Sarah leaned forward slightly. He saw me washing the hoodie. Knew something was off. He threatened to go to the cops, so I told him if he said anything, I'd tell them he helped. You blackmailed him, Sarah said quietly. Derek nodded. He didn't kill her. He didn't touch her. He was scared. I was scared. But I was also proud. I kept the photo like a trophy. Like I mattered for once. Sarah looked away for just a moment, jaw clenched. Emily Carter had been 17. Bright, curious, kind, and gone. Because someone thought following her would make them feel seen. You knew it wouldn't last, she said finally. You knew someone would come looking. I thought it was over, Derek whispered. 9 months and nothing. I thought it was buried. Sarah stood slowly. No. She looked toward the door where Trooper waited, ears alert. It was never buried. That afternoon, Sarah met with Angela and Thomas Carter in a quiet room off the precinct lobby. She didn't bring files or photos, just one small evidence bag. Inside was a silver pendant shaped like a heart, with a rose etched on the front. Angela gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. She never took it off, she whispered. Thomas's hands trembled as he took the bag from Sarah. His voice cracked. Did she suffer? Sarah paused. Then, softly, not for long. Angela broke. Silent tears rolled down her face as Thomas held her. Sarah didn't interrupt. Some things didn't need words. Before she left, Thomas looked up and said, "Thank you for not giving up." Sarah glanced down at Trooper lying at her feet. "I didn't," she said, "but he wouldn't let me." A week later, the mayor's office held a small ceremony at City Hall. Trooper wearing his old K9 vest and a new medal for valor sat beside Sarah on the stage. His muzzle was grayer now. His movements slower, but when the applause came, his ears perked and he stood tall. Mayor Helen Brooks called him a hero. Sarah simply knelt and whispered, "You brought her home." Trooper leaned into her touch. The courtroom was quiet. No cameras, no media frenzy. Just a few rows of folding chairs, a tired judge, 2 grieving parents, and one girl's name on every page of every file. Emily Carter. Derek Vance pled guilty to second-degree murder and evidence tampering. His voice didn't shake. He didn't cry. But when he looked up, just once, and saw Angela Carter sitting in the back row, eyes rimmed red, but steady, his shoulders slumped, like the truth had finally pinned him down for good. The judge's gavel came down like thunder. 30 years to life. No one clapped. No one cheered. Justice never feels like victory. Only relief. Later that day, Sarah Blake sat beside Captain Raymond Ellis in his office, flipping through the final report. "Logan Pierce is off the hook," Ellis said. "Accessory after the fact. No jail time, counseling, community restitution." Sarah nodded slowly. "He was a coward," she said. "But not a killer," Ellis agreed. "He helped hide a monster because he was afraid." Sarah didn't argue. Fear ruins people. Silence buries truth. And sometimes, even good men go quiet when they should scream. But now, the silence had broken. And somewhere, Emily's voice was finally being heard. The funeral was held the following Saturday. Spring had come late that year, dogwood trees just beginning to bloom, their pink and white petals catching the sun like soft confetti. Hundreds showed up. Neighbors, teachers, classmates who had once believed she'd come back. They stood shoulder to shoulder as Emily Carter was laid to rest near the tree line behind her family's home. No cameras, no press, just quiet hands holding other quiet hands. Just a mother with a folded photo. Just a father with eyes that hadn't stopped searching. Sarah sat near the back in uniform. Trooper lay at her feet, head resting on her boot. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Emily's name was finally being said aloud for something other than missing. A week later, Sarah received a letter in her department mailbox, typed, unmarked. Inside was a single sentence. Thank you for listening to the dog. She smiled, because in the end, that's where everything had begun, not with a badge, not with a lab test, but with a scratch at a trash can behind the Maple Lane Library. At City Hall, they unveiled a new plaque under the bench near the park trail. For Emily, you are never forgotten. Beneath it, a smaller inscription, because one dog refused to stop looking. Trooper stood beside Sarah for the dedication, wearing his freshly polished K9 badge. He didn't understand the words, or the speeches, or the cameras, but he knew this. Sarah was proud. The air was peaceful. And the girl they'd been chasing had been brought home. That night, Sarah poured herself a drink and stood on her back porch. Trooper lay nearby, watching fireflies dance in the fading light. She looked out over the quiet neighborhood, the same street where kids still rode bikes and wind chimes still sang soft tunes. But something was different now. Something had shifted. For 9 months, there'd been a gap in the world, a weight no one could name. Now it had a name. A place, a grave, and a story. A story about a girl who fought back, a town that finally listened, and a dog who never stopped searching. Trooper didn't come to the door that morning. For 11 years, Officer Sarah Blake had started her day the same way, coffee brewing, boots by the back step, and Trooper waiting near the fridge with his tail thumping, eyes bright, tongue lolling, always ready for his tiny piece of scrambled egg. But that morning, silence. Sarah called once, then again, nothing. Her heart skipped as she walked out onto the porch, coffee forgotten in her hand. The sun had just broken the edge of the pines, casting golden light over the yard, and there he was, curled beneath the old willow tree in the patch of clover he'd claimed as his own. His body still, his face peaceful, his K9 tag glinting softly in the morning sun. Sarah knelt beside him. She didn't cry. Not right away. She just sat there, hands resting in his fur, whispering things she had never said out loud. You saved her, she murmured. You saved me. His body was warm, but the warmth was fading. And just like that, her partner was gone. The department gave Trooper a full memorial. Not many dogs get one. But Trooper wasn't just any dog. He was the kind who chased ghosts no one else could see. Who found the silence between the lies. Who scratched at a trash can and uncovered a story the town had tried to forget. Retired officers came from across the state. Students brought hand-drawn cards. A boy with autism, who Trooper once comforted during a school visit, placed a stuffed squirrel on his casket. There were no bagpipes, no rifle salute, just quiet, just presence. The mayor read a statement about courage. Captain Ellis shared how Trooper had changed every handler he'd ever trained with. Angela Carter stood briefly and whispered, "He brought my daughter home." Sarah said nothing. She stood in uniform, straight-backed, a folded flag in her hand, and Trooper's first badge in the other. When the service ended, no one moved for a long time. Weeks passed. The neighborhood returned to its rhythm lawn mowers in the distance, mailboxes clanking shut, kids riding bikes past the park. Sarah still walked the old trail,
alone now. Every so often, she'd pause near the bench with Trooper's plaque, rest a hand on the cold metal, and remember the sound of claws on concrete, the low growl that started it all, the steady eyes that told her when to dig deeper. Sometimes she thought she heard him beside her. Sometimes she smiled and whispered anyway. Good boy. In time, Sarah took on a new role, canine liaison for the county. She began training new officers in instinct-based tracking, teaching them to listen not just to procedure, but to the quiet language their dogs spoke through body, breath, and stillness. She visited schools, gave talks at community centers, and every time someone asked about Trooper, she'd pause. Then she'd tell them about the old dog who couldn't retire because a girl was still missing, and how he brought her home, one paw print at a time. The badge stayed on her desk, the leash hung by the door. But every morning, when Sarah stepped onto her porch and felt the sun rise over the pines, she looked toward the willow tree and smiled. Because she knew some dogs never really leave. Summer came slowly that year. The snow had barely melted before the dogwood trees began blooming again near the town square. Pink petals drifted onto sidewalks like confetti from a parade no one planned, but everyone needed. Officer Sarah Blake stood on the courthouse steps, her dress uniform pressed sharp, her badge polished to a shine. At her side was an empty leash. The weight of it felt heavier than any file, any weapon, any truth she'd ever carried. The ceremony was simple. The mayor said a few words about justice. The community talked about healing. Someone from the high school choir sang softly, and near the center of the small gathering stood a new bronze statue low to the ground, ears perked, eyes forward. Trooper, immortalized in bronze, still watching. Still ready. Beneath him, engraved into the base, "You brought her home." After the ceremony, Sarah took the long way home. Not through town, not past the station. She drove out toward the hills, windows down, letting the wind curl through her fingers. The road wound past tall trees, overgrown trails, and the forgotten corners where Trooper used to lead her nose first toward the truth. She parked near a stream, grabbed a thermos of coffee, and stepped out. The air smelled like pine and freedom. She spread a blanket under the same tree where she'd once sat with him months ago, in the quiet between storms. He'd chased squirrels, sniffed rocks, and curled up beside her like the world was finally safe again. Now there was only silence, but not emptiness. Sarah poured herself a cup and leaned back on her elbows, staring up through the branches. "You ever notice," she whispered aloud, "how everyone kept calling it a cold case?" The trees didn't answer. "But it wasn't cold to you, was it?" A breeze stirred the clover. Sarah closed her eyes. "You knew all along. Something didn't smell right, and you couldn't let it go." She smiled softly. Not the kind of smile that hides pain, the kind that honors it. Some people spend their whole careers chasing closure. One case, one victim, one family. Trooper had found it, with a scratch at a trash can. In the months that followed, Sarah made it her mission to share what Trooper had taught her. She traveled across the state, helping other departments understand the power of canine instinct, not just obedience, but emotional intelligence. She spoke at training academies, told Emily's story at schools, and gave seminars titled "Listen to the Dog." She brought hope to families still waiting for answers, and always, she carried Trooper's old badge in her pocket, not as a token, but as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful detectives walk on four legs and speak only with their eyes. One rainy afternoon, a young rookie stopped her outside the precinct. "Officer Blake," he asked, nervous, "can I ask you something?" She nodded. Do you ever stop thinking about the ones you couldn't save?" Sarah looked past him, toward the trees lining Maple Lane, where the library stood, where it all began. "No," she said quietly, "but I think about the ones we did. Especially the ones a dog had to fight for." He blinked. "You mean Trooper?" She smiled.
I mean heroes who don't need a voice to be heard. And so the story lived on. In every trainee who watched their canine a little more closely, in every cold case reopened because of a hunch and a hound, in every park bench where someone sat and whispered, "Thank you." Trooper may have been gone, but his legacy ran through every quiet lead, every buried truth, every small moment where instinct became courage, and courage brought someone home, because in the end, some dogs never really retire. Life has a quiet way of speaking, sometimes through a whisper, sometimes through a dog's scratch at a forgotten trash can. The story of Officer Sarah Blake and her loyal canine partner Trooper reminds us that justice doesn't always arrive with sirens or headlines. Sometimes it starts with a moment no one else notices. In a world that often rushes past pain, this story teaches us the value of listening to instinct, to silence, to those who can't speak for themselves. For older adults who've seen decades of change, loss, and healing, Trooper's journey is a powerful reminder. We are never too old to make a difference, and no voice, human or animals, should be ignored. It's about perseverance when others give up, compassion where others doubt, and the kind of loyalty that lives beyond words. Whether you're holding on to a long-forgotten hope or carrying quiet grief, let this story assure you truth has a way of coming home. And sometimes all it takes is one dog who refuses to stop searching. Hoi ChatGPT.